So that was remarks from Ibu Ani. Let's just go straight to the lecture now. Let me introduce the speaker. So our lecture speaker today is Professor Keijiro Otsuka from Kobe University. He will be talking about the strategy for transforming Indonesian agriculture. Professor Otsuka had an economics PhD from University of Chicago. He was a chairman of the board of trustees of the International Rice Research Institute from 2004 to 2007, the president of the International Association of Agricultural Economies 2009 to 2012, a professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS, in Tokyo, and now he is a professor of development economics at Kobe University. Without further ado, let me invite Professor Otsuka to start his lecture. Over to you, Professor Otsuka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for a very kind introduction about myself. I have some mechanical problems.
I think it's coming. Yeah, it's coming. It's shown now.
I don't know why.
Do you want us to run it for you, Sensei?
Yes, please do it. Please do it.
Okay. Lydia, do you have it? Okay.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah.
Those are.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for a very kind introduction. Honorable Minister, Dr. Suri Murayani Indrawati, fellow researchers, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a great honor for me to be invited to Sadli Lecture today. I always think that research and policy must be linked. This means that economists should listen to policymakers, and policymakers should listen to economists, and economists and policymakers should discuss about key issues. Although I have never met Dr. Sadli personally, that's unfortunate, I understand that he was a great facilitator of the dialogue between economists and policymakers, between researchers and politicians. So following his lead, today I'd like to facilitate dialogue among myself, fellow researchers, policymakers, and general audience. The topic of my presentation is strategy for transforming Indonesian agriculture. Next slide, please. So traditionally, the major role of agriculture was to achieve food security. It is still very important, but it was particularly important before by increasing food production, particularly rice in the context of Asia. And then Green Revolution in rice production played a very important role. And Indonesia's performance was outstanding, transforming Indonesia from a major rice importer to self-sufficient country. That was a surprise, big surprise for many people in the 1970s and 1980s. But major agriculture problems change over time with the development of the economy. There are two important reasons. One, structure of the demand for agricultural products change. And second, labor cost increases because of the development of the economy as a whole. Next slide, please. This one, yes, yes. So as you can see here, this figure shows yield per hectare of rice or paddy in Southeast Asian countries. Performance of Indonesia was great in the 1960s, yield per hectare was less than two tons per hectare. That was lower than the average in Africa now. But it has grown, and then reached to more than 5 tons per hectare. So the yield per hectare more than tripled. And Indonesia is one of the highest yielding country in paddy production, similar to Vietnam. This is partly because of the fertilizer subsidy, the Minister Indrawati mentioned. But this is great performance. Okay, next slide, please. But there are multiple functions agriculture must play in Indonesia now and in future. Number one, as in the past, maintain food security or life self-sufficiency without increasing production cost in the face of increasing wage rate is a major challenge. Second, increase production of high-value agriculture products such as fresh fruit, vegetables, livestock products for nutritional security or for better nutrition and health. Number three, intensify oil palm production without deforestation and social conflict. Number four, promote rural industrialization for increasing employment opportunities in rural areas outside of congested megacities, which are found to be very, very vulnerable to pandemic. So we need more employment opportunities in less congested rural areas. Well, these are the important functions. And so I ask whether Indonesian agriculture has been performing very well on these four issues. Number one, rice is self-sufficient, but at the cost of high domestic rice prices and also heavy fertilizer subsidy. So it seems to me that Indonesia is losing comparative advantage in rice production. Number two, I think that production of high-value product is far from adequate despite increasing demand for them in this country. Number three, I doubt if oil palm production, which has been becoming very important, has been successfully intensified. I'm very doubtful. Number four, I believe that there is much room for improving, promoting rural industrialization. There has been not much policy to promote rural industries. Okay. Next slide, please. So purposes of my presentation are to propose strategy to maintain, improve comparative advantage in rice farming, promote production of high-value products, promote intensive oil palm production without sacrificing environmental sustainability and social equity. And then finally, promote rural agro-based industrialization. Now let me proceed to section 2 about rice. So this section is entitled Need for Farm Size Expansion in Rice Farming. A fundamental characteristics of agriculture. There are few, but one of the fundamental characteristics of agriculture is high monitoring cost of higher labor in spatially dispersed, ecologically diverse production environments. Except in highly mechanized IT-intensive agriculture in high-income countries. For example, in Brazil, huge machines are used, and GPS is used, and satellite image is used to monitor the workers' performance. But in developing countries, it is not economical to mechanize too much. Some mechanization is needed. So monitoring cost of higher labor is a major issue. As a result, I'm reading the second bullet point. As a result, the inverse relationship between farm size and productivity, productivity may be measured by yield per hectare, has been widely observed in developing countries, notably in India. So, in other words, small farms are more productive than large farms because family labor is intensively applied on small farms. In contrast to large farms dependent on hired workers who are prone to shirking, who not work as hard as employer wishes. So Professor Hayami was my major advisor. He's a very well-respected, well-known professor. He passed away several years ago. We argue that the labor markets in care-intensive agricultural activities, such as land preparation, water management, application of fertilizer, etc., never work because of the difficulty in monitoring higher labor. So labor markets in care-intensive agricultural activities don't work. We must keep it in mind very clearly. Okay, next slide, please. This figure is not included in my paper, but this one is from my paper submitted to the Philippines. Al Hill knows this. This shows changes in family and higher labor use for care-intensive activities and other other simple activities in Central Luzon, which have been surveyed more or less every 3 years. In the 1960s and 1970s, care-intensive activities were carried by family labor. Only a little bit of higher labor is used for care-intensive activities. These higher labor, particularly drivers of tractors. So other than that, it was family labor which carried out care-intensive activities. In contrast, for simple activities like weeding, transplanting, harvesting, it was a task of higher labor. That's a very important point. And another point I want to argue is that family labor use for care-intensive activity has been declining over time. This is because of the mechanization, particularly introduction of tractor and combine harvesters. So over time, the importance of family labor for care-intensive activity declines. Okay, please next. So this is like a classroom lecture. This is a question you have to solve. Assume that there are two farms producing the same product using the same technology. So there are farm A and farm B. Farm A has a lot of land, 4 hectares, and only 1 worker. Farm B has 2 hectares, only 2 hectares, and 2 workers. This allocation of resources is not efficient because farm A cultivates too much land. There's only 1 worker for 4 hectare farm. Whereas farm B applies too much labor, 2 workers for 2 hectares. The total production can be increased by reallocating land or labor. There are 2 possible solutions. One is land transaction, another one is labor hiring. So in the case of land transaction, farm A rents out 2 hectares of land to farm B. And then as a result, the farm A has only 2 hectares and 1 worker. Farm B has 4 hectares and 2 workers. Land labor ratios are equalized. That looks good. And another solution is farm A hires 1 worker from farm B. So farm A now has 4 hectares and 2 workers, not 1 worker. And farm B has 2 hectares and 1 worker. Again, land labor ratios are equalized. Both of them look good. Do you agree? It's wrong. It's wrong. Second option is a mistake. The first arrangement is much more efficient because in the second arrangement, worker will not work. Worker shirks under the second arrangement. That is, labor market does not work. So definitely the first option, land transaction, is better than land hiring. Another point is that so far as tenant works diligently, usually he does. That's a result of my intensive research on tenancy. If the tenant works diligently, inverse relationship will be never observed. That is, large inefficient farmers rent out land to efficient small farmers if land market works. Therefore, inverse relation disappears. So inverse relation is often found in areas where land rental market does not work. or it may be suppressed by land reform law. Examples are India and also Japan. Okay, next slide, please. So what are the empirical findings? There are huge numbers of research on the relationship between farm size and productivity. First, inverse relationship is widely observed in many developing countries, particularly when yield is an indicator of productivity. And also in India, where land rental transaction is suppressed by land reform laws. So the land is not transferred from inefficient large farms to efficient small farms. Number two, inverse relationship is weaker or negligible even in developing countries when profit per hectare is used as a measure of productivity. Profit is obtained by subtracting cost of purchased inputs, cost of hired workers, also imputed value of family labor, unpaid family labor. Because small farms apply a lot of family labor, so it's costly. So as a result, difference in profit between small and large farms is less pronounced. Number three, inverse relationship has been weakened or even reversed over time, particularly in high-performing Asian countries, including Indonesia. In Indonesia in the 1970s and 80s, there was a very strong inverse relationship, but now almost nil or positive relationship may be appearing. Number four, positive relationship between farm size and productivity is observed in some high-income countries such as Japan, where large-scale mechanization takes place, but land rental markets are inactive, partly because of the land reform regulations. Number five, U-shaped relationship is observed in transition economies such as China, where both traditional labor-intensive cultivation method and the modern capital-intensive cultivation method are adopted simultaneously. Next slide, please. You can see inverse relationship between farm size and productivity for yield with labor-intensive technology. And in the case of profit, inverse relationship still exists in many developing countries, but the slope is flatter. And then when wage grows, imputed family labor cost increases, therefore advantage of small farms decreases. And in high-income countries where capital-intensive mechanization has been introduced, the relationship becomes positive, as you can see on the right-hand side. In the case of yield and in the case of profit, the positive relationships tend to emerge, unless the land markets work. If land is transferred from less productive smaller farms to more productive larger farms, the positive relationship will also disappear. And then if labor-intensive technology and capital-intensive technology coexist, then we may observe U-shaped relationship, which has been observed in China. Next slide, please. Farm size is too tiny in Indonesia. That's very unfortunate. So in order to maintain comparative advantage in rice farming in Indonesia, farm size must be expanded significantly, and large-scale mechanization must be introduced now. Average farm size, however, has been declining over time, and rice self-sufficiency is achieved, but this is due importantly to supported rice price and also fertilizer subsidy. Can you go to next slide? Yeah, so in 1960, 61, average farm size in Indonesia was 1.2 hectares or something, but it has declined to less than 1 hectare. But everywhere, the Philippine case is also is more terrible. The farm size was quite large in early period, but it has declined to 2 hectares now. Okay, next slide. So this figure shows life self-sufficiency ratio in Southeast Asian countries. Thailand is endowed with rich land resources, and so self-sufficiency ratio exceeds 1. That means Thailand is exporting. For Indonesia, self-sufficiency ratio has been just unity, so it's self-sufficient. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this figure shows world rice price in terms of that is Thai rice exported Thai rice price and the domestic rice price in Indonesia. Until around 2010, 10, there was a shock due to the food shortage in 2008. But other than that, the price gap between world and domestic price was very minimum. Peter Timmer loved it. But after 2010, the gap has emerged and widening. Domestic price is now more than twice as high as the international price. That's too much price support. Next slide, please. Rice self-sufficiency by price support cannot be a good solution. Price support leads to preservation of inefficient small farms. Small farms can survive because of the high price. They receive some profit. So preservation of inefficient small farms lead to rising cost of rice production because small farms are inefficient. Therefore, further price support is needed. And that leads to continued loss of comparative advantage in rice production. That requires the further price support and so on and so forth. So vicious circle continues. Japanese rice price support program is an excellent example of very bad policy. And unfortunately, so the point I just explained, price support leads to preservation of small farms. That is exactly what happened in Japan. And unfortunately, Taiwan and South Korea also follow the Japanese path. They are doing the same thing. That's a terrible thing. So average farm size in Indonesia is very, very small. 2003 average in Indonesia is 0.35 hectare, but it has increased to 0.73, so almost doubled according to the data I got. But it's still tiny. And in the case of Java, 2003, paddy land only 0.08 hectare. 2018, still 0.18. It's too small. We cannot create viable farms with that farm size. Okay, so next slide, please. So expansion of farm size and relocation of rice growing areas are urgent issues in Indonesia. Since there is symptom that there are some studies which show that large farms are more productive than small farms in Indonesia. So farm size expansion must be promoted. Although Minister Indrawati did not mention about farm size expansion and mechanization. From my point, this is really important issue. Since rice farms are too small in Java, rice production should be shifted to outer island. Farm size expansion must be promoted by facilitating land rental transactions, as I mentioned, and consolidating small parcels and supporting mechanization. There is no support for mechanization as far as I could hear from the speech by a minister. And then establishing large rice plantations or food plantations or food estates managed by private companies is an awful policy. I'm strongly against it because such plantations are bound to be very inefficient because of the high monitoring cost of hired workers. Recall that family farms dominate in the world. Even in the United States, in Australia, where farm size is huge, more than 100 hectares, still family farms dominate. Why? Because cost of hired labor is very high. And also we must note that the plantations have been created by the government, always by the government, not by market forces, simply because plantations are inefficient and unproductive. If plantations are efficient and productive, then there should be entrepreneurs who accumulate land and operate large farms. That has never happened. This is because plantations are very, very inefficient. So the policy to establish food estate, I think it's a big mistake. Okay, so let us go back to the simple example I presented earlier. But now, particularly in future, if mechanization takes place in Indonesia, there will be a scale economies. So simple example just earlier should be reconsidered. Assume again that there are two farms producing the same product, farm A, 4 hectares and 1 worker, farm B, 2 hectares and 2 workers. If mechanization is adopted, scale advantages arise, or scale economies arise. Therefore, renting 2 hectares from farm A to B is no longer a good solution. Better solution is renting 2 hectares from farm B to farm A, or renting 4 hectares from farm A to farm B to create 6-hectare farm. Although I assume that land sales market does not function, it may work a little bit and it may help large farms accumulate large areas. But in any case, in the presence of scale economies, it is critically important to establish large farms. Okay, this is the end of my discussion about rice. Now let me proceed to section 3 about promotion of high-value agriculture product. Demand for high-value product has been increasing for better nutrition and health. And then increasing demand for high-value product has been assisted by supermarket revolution. Tom Riordan emphasized this very much. However, supply of high-value products failed to keep pace with the growing demand in developing countries in general and in Indonesia in particular. In Indonesia, areas growing fruit and vegetables account for very, very tiny fraction of cultivation area, as I will show you. And then furthermore, import of fruit and vegetables has been increasing substantially, reflecting insufficient domestic supply. That's not good for health and nutrition. Slide, please. This table shows cropping patterns in terms of planted area of rice, tree crops, and etc. As you can see, the area devoted to fruit and vegetable production is less than 10% of the total cultivation area. That's very tiny. That proportion does not change from 2003 to 2018. Another thing which we should notice is that numbers in parentheses, which are oil palm area, that has been increasing substantially over time. So oil palm is becoming very important. I'll talk about it in the next section. This figure shows the net export. If numbers are positive, that means net export. Net import if numbers are negative. As you can see, Thailand is a major exporter of vegetables and fruits. But Malaysia and Indonesia has been increasing import over time. That reflects insufficient domestic supply of fruit and vegetables. Next slide, please. So it's better to promote production of high-value product, but unfortunately, it is not easy to promote the HVPs because of the several reasons, which I enumerated here. Consumers cannot easily identify quality of high-value products by visual observations, so that markets of high-value products may not work well. The apple may look very good, look very delicious, but when we eat, we may find that the quality is so bad. So quality uncertainty is one of the major problems in marketing of high-value products. And then production of high value products may be too risky for small farmers to initiate because of the large price fluctuations compared with the grain and other products. Since high value products are new, farmers may not know how to produce them. Since high value products are new, extension system may not be in place. Since high value product markets of new seeds, particularly important as pesticides, may be absent or underdeveloped. And as in elsewhere, credit market is unlikely to be working to assist the purchase of new inputs. Next slide, please. This is because of difficulty in initiating high value product production. Contract farming is becoming common to overcome the market failures, which I mentioned on the previous page. Contract farming between farmers and contractors are usually supermarkets or agro-processors, has been emerging in developing countries in order to overcome market failures. Actually, there are two types of contract farming: production contract and marketing contract. In the case of production contract, contractor provides inputs on credit. So credit market imperfection, input market imperfection can be resolved. And then contractor provide technological support after the knowledge to produce new product can be solved. And then contractor offers fixed price that reduces the price risk for farmers. And then contractor undertakes marketing for consumer to reduce or eradicate or remove the problem of product quality uncertainty. There are also marketing contracts. Go back, please. There is second type of contract farming that is called the marketing contract. Contractor specifies inputs, recommends the use of particular brands of fertilizer, etc., provides a little bit of guidance and assists production when needed. Okay. Next slide, please. There is actually shortfall of contract farming. Contract farming, since contract farming introduces new crops, new improved production method, it will certainly contribute to the modernization of agriculture or enhancing efficiency of agriculture in developing countries. Therefore, World Bank, in a World Bank report 2007, Agriculture for Development, strongly recommends contract farming. In the literature, however, whether farmers are significantly made better off by contract farming has been hotly debated. Some researchers said, yes, farmers got benefit. Others said, no, there is no benefit for farmers. In my view, farmers would not receive large benefits from production contract because farmers simply passively accept inputs, passively accept production instructions without undertaking any major management and marketing decisions. This means that farmers do not receive the so-called entrepreneurial profit. Therefore, they might be made better off to some extent, but not significantly. That's my point. And I do not think that the farmers are significantly made better off by marketing contract because of the inadequate provision of production knowledge and new inputs. Okay, next slide, please. So in order to promote the production of high-value products and make farmers significantly better off, transform subsistence into entrepreneurs who are capable of making appropriate management and marketing decisions by offering intensive management training, by strengthening extension systems so that extension workers can train farmers to transform them into entrepreneurs. And then also we should train agro-processors. Economists tend to assume that private entrepreneurs are efficient and private farms are efficient. That's not correct. By now, it is widely recognized among development economists that the major missing factor for development of manufacturing enterprises or major constraint on the development of manufacturing enterprises in developing countries is managerial human capital. or lack of managerial human capital. Because of the imitation by rival firms, private benefit from investing in human capital to acquire improved management and production knowledge is smaller than social benefit. As a result, amount of human capital investment tends to fall short of the social optimum. Suppose I I invested in myself and learned something new and useful, and I received $10,000 of profit. But my neighbors, there are hundreds of my neighbors who can imitate me. Then each of them received $10,000 as additional profit. So social benefit become $1 million. But I do not have very strong incentive to carry out innovation or to invest in my human capital because I do care primarily about my small private benefit. That is why training must be offered by the public sector. Okay, next slide. So we need to develop agro-processing industry. Development of agro-processing industry ought to be a core of rural industrialization, which will provide not only employment opportunities in rural areas, but also stimulate the production of high-value agricultural products. Pack houses, which are not very well known, but pack houses are extremely important. Pack houses are engaged in washing, fumigating, grading, packaging of fresh fruit and vegetables by employing a large number of workers. Without pack houses, high quality vegetables and fruit cannot be sold to supermarkets. So pack houses are also an important part of agro processing industry. So we have to develop them. Okay, let me move on to section 4, intensification of oil palm production. There are advantages of plantations in oil palm production. Scale economies in processing, efficient coordination of oil palm production and harvesting so as to operate processing facilities with full capacity. So in this season, this area should be harvested, and in the next day, next field should be harvested, and the following day, next field, and so on and so forth. So that processing facility can be used with full capacity all the time. That's very important. And that can be easily done in plantations. And then number 3, ability to incur so-called pioneering cost of clearing fields and constructing transportation and communication infrastructure. This is particularly important at the early stage of development. Number 4, better access to finance because oil palm production is capital intensive. Money matters here, and then plantations usually have a good access to finance. There is only one disadvantage of plantations. That is high monitoring cost of hired workers. The same as the case for rice. Thus, whether plantation is more efficient than smallholder farmer is an empirical question. My Professor Hayami argues very strongly that production of pineapples, sugarcane by smallholders under contract farming in Thailand is far more efficient than plantations in the Philippines. Direct Bayeri, Australian, whom I respect very much, also argued that smallholders now dominate over plantations in the production of perennial crops throughout the developing world. Next slide, please. Contract farming with plantations versus independent smallholder farming. The Indonesian government obliges plantations to offer contract farming to smallholders. Yet, according to some studies, number of independent smallholders has been increasing. Some researchers found that 75% of smallholders are independent smallholders without any connection with the plantations, but starting from only 5% in the early 1990s. However, yield of independent smallholder is much lower than that of contracted smallholders. because independent smallholders do not know the cultivation method very well. They apply less fertilizer. Their harvesting cycle is said to be too long, and mortality rate of the plant is very, very high. However, the fact that most smallholders prefer independent farming to contract farming strongly indicate that independent farming is more profitable than contract farming. Moreover, from the theoretical point of view, the advantage of contract farming with plantation is likely to be small in the case of palm oil production because of the absence of quality uncertainty. In the case of high value product like apple, quality uncertainty exists. But in the case of palm oil, the quality difference is minimum. And then farmers can use fallen fruit for seeds. So seeds are available for farmers. And then farmers, the independent farmers can learn from contract farmers about cultivation method. And then there are already many palm oil mills. So access to mills is already very good. So there are very few advantage of contract farming in the case of smallholder. Next slide, please. So there are three fundamental requirements for intensification of oil palm production. Given that extensification or increasing production by expanding cultivation areas by clearing forest is no longer viable and acceptable options. Intensification of oil palm production must be the key strategy to promote oil palm production. There are three fundamental requirements. One, strengthening extension for independent small farmers who do not know much about the efficient production method. Train managers and owners of palm oil mills, particularly about management. As I mentioned, the development economists, including myself, found that the managers and manufacturing enterprises in developing countries are not well managed. Therefore, providing training, particularly management training to managers and owners, are critically important. And although I did not mention, it's very important to establish secure land rights for smallholders, particularly independent ones, which provides proper incentive to invest in sustainable management of natural resources, including trees or tree crops. Okay, next slide, please. So I have two slides for conclusion. I'd like to argue that Indonesia is now at the crossroads. Number one, there's the option of continuing the loss of comparative advantage in rice farming by protecting smallholders versus restoring comparative advantage by farm size expansion and large-scale mechanization. Indonesia must choose between the two. Neglect of high-value production of high-value products versus support for their expansion. The production of high-value products in Indonesia is certainly insufficient. Number three, continuation of inefficient oil palm production by plantations versus support for efficient production by independent smallholder oil palm growers. Number four, continuation of the lack of non-farm employment opportunities in rural areas versus vitalizing agro-processing industry, including pack houses and palm oil mills. So in short, final page, please. In short, keys to transforming Indonesian agriculture are farm size expansion and mechanization. Strengthening public sector extension for rice cultivation of high-value products, and oil palm production. And then it is very important to invest in human capital of farmers, extension workers, and agro-processors, including managers of palm oil production and other agro-processors. Last page. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Otsuka. We have our discussion is Dr. Muhammad Revindo from LPM. The head of Business Climate and Global Value Chain Research Group at LPM and a lecturer at FEB, Fakultas Ekonomi and Business Universitas Indonesia. He has an economics PhD in New Zealand, and his areas of work include SMEs, local economic development, and also industrial organization. Before I hand it over to Revi, I also like to inform the audience that I apologize to you that you cannot see one another due to the security feature of our Zoom platform. But if you have questions, you can now write them in the Q&A box. We will attend to them after the lecture and respond to as many as possible given the time. And we will also allow you to directly ask your question. And for this, please use the raise hand feature. So now let me hand it over to Revi. Revi?
Yeah, thank you, Pak Aco. Can you hear me clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. First, I would like to thank the ANU Indonesia project and for hosting this event, especially Pak Aco, Prof. Budi, Prof. Hill, yeah, and Ibu Lydia. It's an honor for me to share the stage with Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani and Prof. Otsuka. I have to warn you that I'm not an expert on agriculture economics. My only experience is just planting some vegetables in my backyard. So I will put myself in a position of someone who is learning from the paper, just someone who's reading the paper and try to learn from the paper. And I would like to thank and congratulate Professor Otsuka for such an inspirational paper. I enjoyed reading it, Prof. Otsuka. I read every single sentence and word. And kindly allow me to make some comments on the paper simply because I want to learn more about it. Next slide, please. So, yeah, if I can summarize, maybe I can, by summarizing, I can help the audience who have not read the full paper. I have the luxury, I have the privilege to read the draft of the paper. So maybe I can start by summarizing. So the paper reviews the existing literature on Indonesian agriculture and propose some strategies to transform Indonesian agriculture with the main goals, there are four main goals. The first one is to maintain comparative advantage in rice farming amidst the increasing wage rate. The second one is to increase the production of high value agriculture products such as tree crops, fresh fruit and vegetables for better nutrition and health for Indonesian population. The third one is to intensify oil palm production without sacrificing environmental sustainability and social equity. And finally, to promote rural industrialization to provide employment opportunities, because we know that during the pandemic, everybody wants to go back to rural areas, but nobody wants to go to the city. So maybe our future is in the village, but the villages should provide employment opportunities in order to accommodate that. And to me, there's some strength of the paper. The first one is it provides a broad view of the current challenges encountered by Indonesian agriculture. So it looks from a more helicopter view on what's happening to our agriculture at the moment. It's very concise, but exhaustively reviews the relevant literature on this area of research. And it offers some implementable policy option to transform the Indonesian agriculture. And finally, I see that this paper paves the way for both further study. The current study can be pushed forward, and also a new direction of research. Maybe we can think about, okay, maybe we need a new direction of research in this area. Next slide, please. Okay. The challenges in transforming Indonesian agriculture identified by Professor Otsuka in the paper, I identified at least three. Apologize if I repeat this. So the first one is small rice farm size, accompanied by increasing wage rate, and also the government consistently support the domestic price. So it creates the high land rental fees that prevents large-scale mechanization. The second one, the second challenges identified is the high agriculture value products are new to both farmers and consumers. So there are imperfect input markets, weak dissemination of new technology and management, and also the consumer need another party, another channel to verify the quality of the products. The other challenge is growing number of smallholder oil palm farmers, which imply low production efficiency, and they are prone to changing market requirements. For example, a new standard imposed by importing countries, especially developed countries, especially the environment and sustainability standard. Of course, in the paper, Professor Otsuka argued that the smallholder farmers, even the independent one, does not have much lower productivity than the plantation. Yes, but their smallness is prone to changing in global market environment. So the paper suggested some policy measures. The first one is support rice farm size expansion and mechanization by abolishing price support. This one will be a very big discussion in Indonesia. I mean, this is quite sensitive, but yeah, maybe we have to start to talk about it. The second one, strengthen public sector extension system for high value products. So why is it important? Because farmers, by doing so, the farmers can have the knowledge and managerial ability to make critical decisions. And when they have the power to decide, then they can accrue the entrepreneurial profit. Because otherwise, the critical decision will be taken by other parties, like by the marketing channel or by someone who is on the downstream. So the farmer cannot make the extra profit from that. And then the last one, to invest in human capital or agro processors and managers of packhouses and palm oil mills. After reading this, I have some questions, I have some comments, maybe something to discuss this morning. Next slide, please. The first one, I would like to touch upon the land titling. So land titling to me is very important because by securing land right, the farmers can have security and they have confidence to plant more tree crops that can yield good value in the long term, and they can also access the finance. But at the same time, it's quite dangerous in the case of Indonesia because once the land has title, the market value is very high. So the farmers have the temptation to sell their lands immediately because suddenly when someone comes with the cash to their house, they say, okay, sell me your land. This is 200 million rupiahs, for example. It's hard to resist the temptation. So land title is important, but it also has risk. So the farmers need financial literacy in order to use the land title for their production in the long term. The second one, there is also imperfect market of other inputs, such as fertilizer, improved seeds, and safe pesticides. So it's quite difficult to abolish price support without reducing production costs. We know that in the last few months, there is a heated public debate about rice farmers complaining about low price of rice at the farmers level, right? We know about that. So on the one hand, it's simply that they enjoy the price support, but they still think it's too low. But at the same time, it represents the high cost of production. So even with the price support, the farmers still think that the price is too low now. And then I would like to ask also from Professor Otsuka, okay, the smallholder palm oil farmers, they are not too disadvantaged against the plantation. But what is their position when it comes to oil replanting program? Because again, there's a land clearing. There's again several years waiting before they can harvest. So again, the plantation have the advantage over the smallholders. And then what is also the position of smallholder palm oil farmers? Encountering the changing in demand structure, domestic demand structure, because there's growing demand for a biofuel instead of processing into cooking oil. The other one that I would like to explore more from Professor Otsuka is you suggest that high value products can be shifted to Java and rice production can be shifted to outer islands. But there's the issue of soil fertility and farming culture issues, because in Java, the people have been cultivating rice for 100 even 1,000 years. They know every single detail about it. While in Sumatra, for example, they are more familiar with tree crops. And I would like to also ask your opinion about current institutional framework. Are they capable of navigating the transformation from the central government, our ministries, local government, and also other agencies that support this agriculture in Indonesia? Finally, I hope that if we address all of these issues, then we can have smooth agricultural transformation. Smooth is we transform not only the agriculture, but we also transform the people and the culture. So we ensure that no one is left behind. So as an Indonesian living in Indonesia, many of us do not realize the changes in agriculture because we live the changes, right? So Professor Otsuka is watching from the distance, and he may have different perspective of Indonesia agriculture. Overall, the paper forced us to sit back and rethink of our agriculture policy and economy. So that's about it from me, Pak Aco. Back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Revi. Very nice discussion. Professor Otsuka, I will just go directly to question and answer, so you can also address Dr. Revindo's remark when you respond to other questions. I hope that's okay with you. Some hands raised already, so I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. So we will manage the time hopefully more smoothly. So I see hands raised by Ross McLeod, John McCarthy, and Peter McCauley. So let's start with Ross.
Thank you, Ato. I guess you can hear me now.
Yes.
And thank you for your presentation, Otsuka Sensei. I was struck by the fact that Professor Otsuka is worried about the alleged loss of comparative advantage in rice production in Indonesia, and he attributes this to rising wage rates. But it seems to me that by definition, if one sector of the economy is experiencing a loss of comparative advantage, then other sectors of the economy, we don't need to ask which ones they are, must be offsetting that. Their comparative advantage must be increasing. So I'm not quite sure why you see a problem there. It just seems to me that all we're saying is that the rice sector is going to shrink in relative importance, with other sectors becoming relatively more important. I don't see that as a problem. Following on from that, the preferred policy response is to advocate the adoption of labor-saving mechanical technology. But prior to that, we've noted a couple of important policy goals, namely poverty reduction and employment generation. Now, if we're going to go and mechanize agriculture, then it seems to me that's going to reduce the demand for workers, and it's going to put a downward pressure on wage rates. It's going to sort of cut off that mechanism that currently is helping to reduce poverty. So I guess I'd like your response to that sort of apparent contradiction. And I just sort of should add that the whole paper proceeds on the premise that it's important to aim for self-sufficiency in rice. I don't think that is true, and the argument hasn't been made. I noticed in one of the charts, a couple of the countries were more than self-sufficient in rice and a couple of countries were less than self-sufficient in rice, and Malaysia was another one. Well, I don't see Malaysia being harmed by not being self-sufficient in rice, and so I guess I'd like you to tell us why you think it's important for Indonesia to be self-sufficient when it can produce an awful lot of rice and it can also buy rice from its neighbors such as Thailand and Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Let me now invite John McCarthy. John?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Professor Otsuka, for a very interesting presentation, which I very much enjoyed. As a non-economist, though, I was just wondering whether we can make all our decisions based on the economic efficiencies you identify. For instance, if we were to combine all small holdings into larger holdings, where would all the farmers go, given that the urban sector is struggling to absorb all that labour? The landless also tend to be more food insecure than people in the rural environment who have diversified livelihoods. Even if they have small plots of land, that actually helps their food security. So we can't just think about efficiencies. And also, even when rural people move to the city, there's a lot of evidence that their households keep a foot on the land, which provides them with a safety net right along. A lot of poor urban workers have moved back to their villages. So I guess my question is, should we also consider social efficiencies as well as economic efficiencies? And for instance, Indonesians like to talk about the social function of land, and it's
cut for 2 minutes for now and go back to Professor Otsuka before I take the second round. Sorry about that. So Otsuka Sensei, dozo.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Revindo. Your comments make a lot of sense. Financial literacy following line untitled. The untitling is a major challenge. It's not as easy as we just speak. You said difficult to abolish price support. Yes, it is indeed very difficult to abolish price support. But we are facing the choice between the two: preservation of small farms, efficient farming, high cost of production, or more efficient. We have choice better. I believe that there is a great profitable opportunity to improve production farming in Indonesia by mechanization and by farm size. But if all the Indonesians argue that no, it's okay, we are willing to support financial burden for rice program. High value products, maybe in Java, rice in outer islands, we need a consultation with agriculture scientists and others. But it is quite clear that rice farming cannot be viable in Java. Probably a high value product.
Recording in progress.
I'm an economist, agriculture economist looking at Asia and Africa, but I have never been to Indonesia for the last 15 or 20 years, so I don't know the institution very much. But certainly research and development are very important, and you need very strong institutions. But Indonesia has succeeded in strengthening rice production. So I think Indonesia has the ability to develop high-value product sectors and oil palm and other products as well. I may be wrong. My impression is there is too much focus on in research and extension, but Indonesia should look at the high-value products and also oil palm. Comments from Ross McDowell. Loss of comparative advantage is a natural thing which happens anyway. I have 2 points. The expansion of farm size and mechanization, I think, is a socially productive movement. Without doing that, losing comparative advantage without doing that thing is not a good thing. The farm size should be expanded and mechanization should be introduced. And if comparative advantage still decreases, that's okay in some sense. And also, I did not mention in the paper, I predict that the food prices will rise very fast because foods by Asian countries like China. China needs farm size expansion, but farm size expansion is taking place very, very slowly. So I predict that China is going to be a major importer of foods. Similarly, India, land markets are not working because of the land reform laws. So I'm afraid that India is going to be a massive importer of food grains. That means prices of food grains would increase tremendously, and everybody suffers. So increased efficiency of rice production, I think, is important. Actually, I do not care so much about self-sufficiency, but for facilitate discussion, I thought it's nice to mention self-sufficiency. But self-sufficiency is not, from economic point of view, self-sufficiency does not mean much. John McCarthy's comment. Lots of people migrate from rural to urban areas, but still many of them keep their land. What shall we do? I strongly argue that land rights must be secured so that urban residents who own land can easily rent out the land. That will contribute to farm size expansion. And as usual, there are problem of equity and efficiency. I'm talking about efficiency, and equity aspect should be determined by policymakers or people at large. But at least I wish people understand the efficiency issues. That was the purpose of my paper. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Otsuka Sensei. The next three are Peter Mokoli, Greg Acciaioli, and Sri Rahmat. So Peter Mokoli.
Hi, I have unmuted. Can you
Yes.
hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Otsuka Sensei. Domo, arigato. That's a very good presentation, a very good overview. I have one main comment about mechanization. Sometime in the past, I used to do work on rural electrification. And I looked at some studies of rural electrification, both in Indonesia and in China. I'd just like to comment on that, and I'm supporting your argument here for mechanization. One of the characteristics of the agricultural sector in Indonesia, in rural areas, is the remarkably low level of mechanization, both rural electricity and also other machines. Overall, Indonesia's electricity consumption is low, but if you venture into rural areas, large numbers of rural areas in Indonesia have almost no electricity at all. They are nominally connected to electricity supplies, but the levels of electricity connection are extremely low. Furthermore, a very marked contrast between the situation in Indonesia and in China is that in China, rural electrification is used for productive purposes, whereas in Indonesia, it is used for consumptive purposes. And finally, I don't want to, I'll keep this short. If you travel around Australian farms, I'm here in Australia, farmers in rural areas have an extraordinary number of machines, including small held hand machines, these days increasingly driven by batteries. Batterization of small-scale rural machinery is occurring at a quite widespread rate in Australia, and it's badly needed in countries like Indonesia. And the final thing is, I am surprised really that the Perusahaan Listrik Negara, the state-owned electricity enterprise, is not promoting this more. In many countries, the main electricity corporation has a large number of showrooms where they are providing information on the use of machines that are available and encouraging electricity use. So all of these things I think are needed in Indonesia, and I am supporting your argument in favor of mechanization. Thank you very much. Domo, arigato, terima kasih to my Indonesian friends. Domo, ba. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So next is Greg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. For a non-anthropologist, non-economist like me, this was a fantastic presentation, seeing the sort of logic of evaluating all those options. But I am a bit concerned that one factor that was not highlighted in the presentation was consideration of environmental externalities of various cultivation and production possibilities. So I'm wondering how taking that aspect into account, for example, how the high sensitivity of the productivity of oil palm to inputs can lead to strategies which, for example, lead to high runoff and destroying surrounding production, such as fisheries and nearby lakes and rivers, as well as even the availability of potable water in the vicinity of large concentrations of oil palm production. I'm wondering how factors like that would affect your evaluation of sustainable strategies for improving Indonesian agriculture. And the same would apply, for example, for the suggestion of increasing agro-processing in the rural areas, which would also lead to more externalities of that sort. So, terima kasih banyak.
Thank you, Greg. Next, Sri Rahmat. Ya, silakan. You're still muted. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Pak. I would like to raise the real problem of our agriculture. Actually, where rural area as a key in employment from urban, and mostly our agriculture worker are dominated by old people, old person. And there is no such kind of specific strategy on how to encourage young people to interested in working on our agriculture. And actually this has become concern 10 years ago, but up to now there is no there is no solution or strategy being implemented or adopted in our country. And then added by disaster and climate change effect that really significantly affect our environment. That many farmers in rural area, they are desperate because they don't know how to do plantation with climate change knowledge in terms of sustain their farming. I did this research, but I haven't published it, and many institutions haven't known that actually our grassroots need the knowledge in terms of climate change to face their daily life, including working on any sector.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Sri. You're from BPS, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ibu. Yeah. So let me go back to you, Otsuka Sensei.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter, for very supportive statements. Yeah, I agree with you that electrification is very important. You mentioned batterization, use of battery. I fully agree with that. Great concern about the environmental issues. In order to prepare the paper for Sadli Lecture, I reviewed the literature as much as possible. And I found a lot of discussions against deforestation in relation to oil palm production. That is why I emphasize intensification rather than extensification. That Greg mentioned pollution. There are many runoff problems and waste coming from oil palm mills and so on. Yeah, certainly we must be concerned with those externalities. And if you know the relevant papers, I would appreciate to receive it and incorporate the ideas into the revised version of my paper. Suri Rachmad's comment, I think he mentioned that farmers are very old and therefore they're concerned about the future of farming. The same argument is made in Japan. Farmers are old and young people are not interested in farming. For me, that's a good news. Very good news. Old people are about to retire and few young people are interested. That means there's a great chance for farm size expansion. Without losing people from rural areas, farm side, rural employment opportunities must be created. That's a different issue. But it's nice if the number of people interested in farming decreases. Otherwise, the farm size expansion cannot take place. But if there is a chance to operate large farms, selected young people get interested because it is profitable. Farmers do not know about climate change, etc. I think that is why we have to strengthen the extension systems, and also in some cases we need regulations by the government. But the extension is an important part of improving production efficiency and improving environment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sensei. Next three will be Patrick Anderson, Budi Reso Sudarmo, and Hal Hill. Patrick, you go first.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Professor Otsuka Sensei. I really appreciated your presentation. You noted that a fundamental requirement for intensification of oil palm is establishing secure land rights for smallholders. And Dr. Vinder Dane there is another option, because providing secure land rights can also be met by recognizing collective rights, the rights of communities, the rights of indigenous peoples, the rights of cooperatives. And when that is the approach to securing land rights, then small farmers within those groups can manage lands. And when they're no longer able to, then the lands will stay down at the collective. So I put that forward as an important approach that Indonesia should be taking. And at the moment, it does not have, through its land laws, mechanisms for recognizing collective tenure, especially for indigenous peoples, or the mechanisms that are there are not functioning well. Another comment I wanted to make is that we heard from Ibu Menteri Sri Mulyani, and she was saying part of government policy is advocating industrial food estates, the expansion of large-scale industrial plantations outside of Java. And I just wanted to note that there are enormous risks with this, and we've seen it over decades where transmigration has been used to establish these industrial estates, enormous environmental and social impacts, local communities being displaced, large-scale deforestation. And I'm very concerned that this is part of government policy. And I agree with you, Professor, that it's more important and successful for the government to focus on intensification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Mas Budi.
Thank you very much, Acho, for the opportunity. First of all, thank you very much for Professor Otsuka. It's great to hear your presentation, and it's always enlightening to listen to what you say. So the first issue that I would like to raise is about human capital among farmers. You put a stress on extension, while I think you also know that in Indonesia, we do have a problem when we extend the extension. One issue is that extension system can be easily overtaken by the interests of industry. Yeah, for example, what happened in Indonesia is that during the Green Revolution is that the extension system has been overtaken by fertilizer company and pesticide companies. So we are overusing of fertilizer, and there is a certain period that we overuse fertilizer and pesticide. Now, I was surprised that you're not mentioning about farmer field school, which has been argued by literature. This is an alternative to enhance farmers' ability so that they could improve their productivity. And it's not mentioned in your paper. The second issue is the issue of the influence of commercial or information in changing the diet system among people within a country. So the issue that the increasing demand of rice, for example, yes, once because of the population and Indonesian getting wealthier, but also a lot of other people that initially has different diet move to rice. And one of the issue is that there is actually a reason that those areas do not consume rice because their land is more suitable for other commodity that now is not being produced. So the dynamic between the changing pattern of people and the land suitability for food is not also being mentioned in your presentation. And finally, one question is that about this specific rice. I'm also often listen to Norman Apov, who basically promotes SRI, which is system rice intensification, which use less water. And Norman in Cornell has been promoted it as the way to go. So there is another thing that it seems to me that also discuss is this not about mechanism, not about farmer ability, but also the way we cultivate plantation has also progressing, and it's not being discussed in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Budi. Let's now go to Hal here. Hal?
Thanks, Acho, and thanks also to the leader and Pierre and others organizing. And good afternoon, Kay. Hope things go well in Kobe for you. So I really enjoyed your talk. It's very illuminating. You know the subject so deeply, and I like also the comparative story. I had a question, and it partly involves putting on your Erie hat again, since you were heavily involved with Erie. The issue is, you mentioned that China becoming a major food importer and possibly even India, and therefore rising prices. doesn't that raise the general issue that we probably need a second kind of green revolution? And not like the 60s, because the environment, the physical environment's changed, climate change and water stress and all that. But my impression is that globally, the world is under-investing in agricultural R&D, and maybe we really need a second round of major R&D commitments. What form it takes, whether it's global, whether it's public, whether it's private, how much country interactions with the global story. Seems to me that's really a big looming issue, isn't it? And incidentally, this is a comment to our Indonesian colleagues. And by the way, Revi, I liked your presentation too. My impression is that Indonesia is not as active in agricultural R&D as it was, for example, during the Suharto era, when there was that really big push, and we know Suharto himself was deeply involved with it. And maybe there's an Indonesian story there as well, that the national R&D agricultural effort needs to be reinvigorated. So thanks again, Kay. A great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Hal. Over to you, Otsuka-sensei.
Thank you very much for excellent comments. That means they are very difficult ones, which I don't like. Patrick Anderson's comment, collective rights. I do not have sufficient knowledge of the usefulness of individual land rights versus collective rights. In some places, I know that the granting land rights to the community works very well. That has been the case in Ethiopia and a few other places. So it's an important issue to assess the impacts of granting land rights. There is insufficient amount of economics research in this area. Large-scale plantations, as I mentioned in my presentation, that is extremely bad idea, extremely bad policy. That should be abolished. I'm sure, I'm 100% sure that this large-scale plantation program will be a big failure. There's no question about it. Human capital of farmers, this is the Buddhist comments. Extension system was overtaken by fertilizer companies during the Green Revolution. Extension workers do not work very hard everywhere. Unless we inform farmers that there is valuable knowledge to be extended to them. We must inform farmers that important knowledge can be disseminated. Without the combination of the strengthening extension and informing farmers, the extension system will not work. Farmers feel, yes, I support it. When I said the farmers must be trained, I did not explicitly mention farmers feel school, but it can work. SRI, system of rice intensification system. This may or may not work in Indonesia. So there are two requirements, two issues. Irrigation facility must be very nice, very precise. Very accurate water control is needed. So irrigation system, good irrigation system must be in place. But that is the case in many areas in Indonesia. Another one is SRI is very labor intensive. Therefore, in areas where wage rates are high, or areas where access to non-farm employment opportunities are very high, SRI is not adopted. SRI is adopted in relatively remote areas where labor cost is relatively low. So, but SRI, I don't think dominates the production system in many places. Particularly in Indonesia, wage rate is increasing, and I don't think SRI will become very popular. Second, green revolution. I made complaints. I criticized the land policies in China and India, but you cannot, given that or considering that we cannot influence policy of Indonesia, India, and China, we have to accept that the land side expansion will not take place to a significant extent. Some farm side expansion will be taking place, but not enough to really improve the production efficiency. So given small farm size, practically speaking, we have to think of how to increase food production. I think you are right. We have to think time will come when we have to think about increasing productivity or yield of rice and other food crops again in coming years. But I'm afraid I'll be retired by then.
Thank you, Sensei. Before I go to the last round, can I invite Revi if he wants to give some remarks? Maybe you want to comment on Hal's point about doing research in Indonesia?
Oh, this will be an honor to me. You're always welcome. or maybe Pacho, you can invite me to Canberra or to Kobe, Professor.
Yeah,
I have no further remarks. I have no further remarks. It's an honor for me to be able to discuss it.
Okay, so next I will invite Chris Manning, Elsa Manginsela, Peter War, and there's another one because this is the last round. Let's have 4 questions, and the last one is Ibu Donna Gultom. So first, Chris Manning. Chris?
Terima kasih, Pak.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much for a very informative talk, Professor Otsuka. I have a similar response perhaps to my friend John McCarthy, and that is the proposals that you make are very radical for rural Java, for what Professor Sayogyo referred to as the Petani Gurem, the small farmers, the massive small farmers that have been heavily protected for the last 20 years. And you're suggesting that both mechanization and increased farm size will provide, will solve some of the production and productivity issues. But I wonder, what about the employment? Where do they go? And perhaps you could tell us a little bit from international experience and specific Indonesian challenges in that area. Where are the better jobs going to come, and particularly in rural areas, rural industrial jobs? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Chris. Ibu Elsa.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to join this webinar. Actually, I'm really support what Sensei Otsuka and Peter McKelvey opinion that mechanism of technology should be applied in rice production, because even though now recently one national paper have published that there are profit sharing between farmers and the owner of a rice mill. They create the system so the production become very efficient, and that can be make the farmer can get more income. However, I think the technology still need it to make the farmer can increase the added value for their income. Also, the second one, when I'm in University of Hawaii around 2005, I read one research paper report from India. They have a research. They make combination between rice seed or rice and mangrove. so the rice can cultivate on the beach or on the sea. I just wondering maybe this research can make solution for because Indonesia have a tiny size of land according to Otsuka Sensei. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Elsa. Peter War.
Thank you very much, Professor Otsuka. What a fantastic presentation that was. I recognize that a lifetime of research and thought lay behind your presentation today. Well worth careful study by all of us. I regret that I haven't read the paper yet, but I shall do so immediately. And I really appreciated your presentation today, Kay. I think there was one big theme behind what you said, and that theme was the superiority of land transactions over labor transactions. The problem with the labor transactions is the difficulty of monitoring labor inputs in an agricultural environment. Now that's intrinsic to the nature of agricultural production. But there's a problem with land transactions too. And that problem is institutional. It's a problem of insecure property rights in land, which impedes the movement of land from inefficient small farms to larger farms where the land would be more productive. That's an institutional problem, which can be fixed by policy. But policy can't do anything about the problem of labor markets. The monitoring of labor inputs is going to be a problem regardless of any policy. So I add that additional point to what you said about the superiority of land transactions over labor transactions. Now, I hear this story about the difficulty of land tenure, difficulty of property rights in every Asian country that I work in. I hear it all the time. I've been working on Myanmar recently, same thing. Thailand, same thing. Indonesia, you've said that. It's a legal problem, which policy can, in principle, address. Now, I think this problem is going to become more severe because of the aging of the rural labor force that you pointed out. As the labor force becomes older, the cost of the difficulty of transferring land from old farmers who want to retire to more efficient, larger farms, that cost is going to increase. I'm sure it's very high in Japan now, the cost of this land difficulty. Now, I think that I agreed with a lot that my friend John McCarthy had to say, but I just offer the hypothesis that one reason that rural people moving to urban areas, one reason that they hang on to their land is the inefficiency of the land market situation, the difficulty of selling their land to more efficient, larger farmers. It's not that they want to keep the land, it's that they have difficulty unloading it successfully. Having said all those nice things, I wouldn't be Peter War if I didn't say something critical. Sorry about that, Kay.
Expected that.
So now, my problem is with your conclusions. Everything you said until you got to the conclusions was based on careful empirical research. But then when you got to the conclusions, you got carried away by making statements that were not based on careful empirical research. So I want to disagree with what you said in your conclusions in two ways. First, what you didn't say. Here I'm repeating something that Hal said. Empirical research on Indonesia has indicated that the return to public agricultural research is very high. You didn't mention that, and the minister didn't mention it either, and I think it should. Now, I think a problem here is if you go to an Indonesian research station, I don't mean IRI, I don't mean the international research establishments, I mean the Indonesian research institutions. They look very primitive. They look under-resourced. The people don't have PhDs. They're not publishing in the big international journals. So there's a tendency to think, oh, low tech, very ineffective. That's a mistake, because the productivity of taking new research ideas that are generated internationally and converting them to usable technologies within the country, Indonesia in this case, that is so productive, even given the technical nature of the research establishment of Indonesia, that it's easy to make that mistake. Now, what you did say is, oh yes, more extension. Well, empirical research, I've done some of this myself, indicates that the return to public extension activities in Indonesia is very low, and Indonesia is not unique here. The return to public research is very high, public extension very low. Why is it very low? I suspect that it's the very same labor monitoring problem that you drew attention to when you talked about labor market transactions, but that's merely a conjecture, that's a hypothesis. I don't know. Of course, improved extension services could have a high return, but under the existing institutional arrangements, public agricultural research is productive, public extension isn't. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, Ibu Dona Gultom. Silakan, Ibu.
Thank you, Pak Acho, to allow me to somehow say something from my side. Thank you, Professor Otsuka, for your presentation. I found it really comprehensive, and you made it very true. You know, my background is working with Agriculture Ministry, and I observed the whole things that you have presented in your paper. So I fully agree with your presentation. Realizing the farm size, small farm size, sometimes we call our farmers not even small farmers, peasant. I mean, most of our farmers, they don't have even their own land. So, but like you said in your data, the ownership, the land size owner is so small. And my all concern is whatever the research result or technology on agriculture they would like to apply to our agriculture production, it won't work because of the small size of farmers. It owns by all farmers, respective farmers. And it's so difficult to apply the technology, the mechanization, like you said, that's why the productivity is low. So my question is, actually, we tried our government tried the approach of bringing these small farmers into one scale, to the economic scale. So we developed previously, long time ago, how to into the institutional form of the farmers to bring them into the scale of economic. But like the previous speaker or the questioner, who provide views to you, also said the extension workers now, because of our democratization, somehow the extension workers is now become the effect of them, and the availability of extension workers is very, very limited now. So I don't know what is your views. I see your conclusion and recommendation, but I don't think it's easy to implement in Indonesia. Land is scarce in Indonesia with the population growing. So I'm still believe until now that the farmers have to be brought together into the institutional scale, to the economic scale. So, but the thing is how to make this successful, because we have tried this, it won't work, it didn't work, and I think that up until now I still believe on this approach. So whether you have experience or views or whatever, that maybe Indonesia is unique. You cannot just apply the theory as simple as that. You have to see like land, small piece of land is not effective being used, but still they don't want to let it be taken by others because it belongs to them. It is in their heart. So Indonesia is quite unique in agriculture. So if you can provide your views, we listen to you, how to bring these small farmers they still work on their farmers, but they are in unity in one scale with other farmers. Thank you. Thank you, Pak Acho.
Thank you, Ibu Dona. So with that, over to you, Otsuka Sensei.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, there are really excellent comments, and I'm very happy to respond. Chris Manning mentioned where the sources of employment come if labor is saved in rice farming. So we have to create employment opportunities in urban areas as well as rural areas outside agriculture, outside the rice farming sector. Otherwise, the rice farming will continue to be very inefficient. So employment generation must be an important target for the economy as a whole. Rice grown together with mangrove, ordinary rice is susceptible to salinity. There are some resistant varieties, but still salinity is a major problem. So I don't think rice production can be increased to a significant extent by growing rice with mangrove. Palm oil mills I missed, but yeah, there can be better contractual relationship between palm oil mills and the farmers. Contract farming is forced by the government to offer more free transactions allowed. I think contractual relationship between farmers and oil mills will be improved. Peter Bo, taking this opportunity, I'd like to thank him. I have to thank him. He provided me some data for 1 year about the rice price. He kindly looked for his old data set and then sent it to me. I appreciate that. As I mentioned, the monitoring higher labor is very difficult and costly. But you are right. Property rights are very important or essential for land rental market to work. The land rental market does not work well in some countries like India because of the absence of established land rights for landowners. But in Myanmar, of course, the land right systems are terribly bad. But I thought maybe in the Northeast Thailand, some farmers do not have a certificate of land ownership. But I assume that in many areas in Asia, land rights are relatively well established. But if I'm wrong, please send me your papers or other papers. I will incorporate discussions about them. Research, again, I need, I spent more than a month to review the literature on Indonesian agriculture. And then based on the literature review, I came up with a paper. But if there's a clear evidence that the research rate of return to research is very high, but the rate of return to extension is low. But maybe I'm now working very seriously in Africa. In Africa, major bottleneck is extension. Good technologies are there, but they're not. Good technologies are not disseminated. But the extension system does not pay if there is no strong research institution. Extension is important when there's a new technology developed by research. So in that sense, I should have mentioned about the research. And I would appreciate Peter if Peter sends me relevant papers. I'm happy to incorporate that arguments into my paper. I'm not so sure about the one reform in China. In some villages in China, all the farmers contribute the land to the village leader or village institution. And then village chooses just a few farmers to cultivate the whole huge areas. That may work. That may work. Correct. But collective farming will never work. That's a nightmare. Commune system in China was very, very inefficient. That is very well known. So collective farming is not efficient, but establishing land rights and let people rent out the land to the community, and community select few promising farmers to manage the whole land. That kind of system may be able to work from my viewpoint, but the empirical evidence is still very weak, so I cannot confidently say that that kind of system works. But Indonesians and Indonesians must think how to expand the farm size without sacrificing efficiency. That is a serious challenge and difficult challenge. But every country faces this difficult challenge, particularly in the context of Asia, including Japan. I criticize Japan's policy, but I also understand that the policy to expand farm size in Japan is very, very difficult. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Professor Otsuka. We have passed our time limit. On behalf of ANU Indonesia Project and LPM, we give our sincere appreciation, very highest appreciation to you for giving us a good lecture and also discussion, and also to Pak Revi for a nice discussion. Thanks to our team at LPM and ANU. And in closing, I think Bu Lydia will play a short video to remember our beloved Pak Sadli. Again, thank you so much for everything.